My name is Lotte, and I'm the director of the Boonton Holmes Library in Boonton, New Jersey. It gives me huge pleasure to welcome Eleanor Herman back. When she told me the first time that she was interested in flying taxis, I was like, I want to know about this as soon as possible. And I am shocked, stunned, and amazed that nobody else is interested in this. But hey, go for it, babe.
Thank you so much, Lotte. So welcome. And this is a really exciting topic for me. It's a little bit different from the things I usually talk about. So many of you probably remember those flying cars from the Jetsons in the 1960s and from Blade Runner in the 1980s. And they seem so very futuristic. Most of us never imagined that they would actually become a real thing. Well, the technology is here, and those aircraft will be up and running in the next 3 years in many major cities around the world. This is news to most people I've spoken to. Most everyone knows about drones, but what they don't know is that the next step with drones is to make them much bigger, much more powerful, and capable of carrying passengers or 1,300 pounds of cargo. And this public unawareness is why when folks at the library ask me what I'd like to talk about, since I don't have a new book out this year, I thought this would be an interesting topic. So what many people don't know is that in addition to being a New York Times bestselling historian, I'm president of a small company that does market studies in the field of urban air mobility, or advanced air mobility as it's increasingly being called. UAM includes drones and passenger carrying Evitol, or electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, which will have many use cases, and we'll get into them in a few minutes, including on-demand air taxi, where you will at some point in the future buy a ticket on an app on your phone, head to the nearest vertiport where these new aircraft will take off and land, and fly from downtown to the airport or your suburb or across the river, bypassing the congested bridge and any number of other places. And at some point in the next 12 to 15 years, these vehicles will be autonomous or unpiloted. So you hop in and woo, it takes off. So now I'm going to share my PowerPoint. Can you all see that? Yes, they're nodding. Okay. So not only will urban air mobility offer new mobility options with reduced greenhouse gases, as they'll run on batteries or at some point in the future hydrogen, it will also create thousands of jobs in every region where it's introduced, billions in overall economic activity through 2045, and hundreds of millions of dollars in tax revenues, which certainly interests politicians. And my parent company, Nexa Advisors, has done numerous economic impact assessments on the question of urban air mobility jobs and economic productivity. So in order to introduce you to this subject, I'm going to show you a video which was made right before the pandemic shutdown. And the first speaker is my husband, Michael Diamond. All of the figures mentioned in the video are now wildly higher, as this is an extremely fast-moving industry with news of new technologies and massive new investments almost every day.
75 leading cities worldwide, up to $318 billion will be spent on urban air mobility between 2020 and 2040. The company, which advises aerospace and transportation investors, believes that as many as 28,000 Evitol aircraft will enter service over the next 20 years.
We think that certain cities can actually begin to absorb and operate electric vertical takeoff aircraft as soon as they're available and certified. That could be as early as next year. This is not just a US game. There are other countries that are anxious to have vehicles certified and put into operation far more quickly than the dates or deadlines that you're hearing from regulators, or for that matter, from some of the industry spokespeople from Uber or elsewhere. So I'll give you an example, a very good example of Vancouver in British Columbia. Vancouver is a water city. The city itself is surrounded by water on three sides. It has a vibrant, profitable helicopter charter sector. And NAV Canada is anxious to begin providing air traffic services for piloted vehicles as soon as they become available and put into operation. So that could be next year.
The Vertical Flight Society, an organization that so far has mainly focused on supporting the advancement of helicopter technology, now sees eVTOL aircraft as a big part of the industry's future.
There's a lot of interest around the world for air taxi types of services. So EHang in China has some limited ability to have their passenger aircraft, not necessarily for passenger service, but they may get that approval from China and then this year or sometime soon. Also in Germany, there's Volocopters flown probably a couple thousand flights. They're working with EASA on approval to do that. They've flown in Singapore and some other countries. So it's sort of a race to see who will be first, but it's really more about safety and actually having a useful and productive system. So Uber's plan is 2023. Joby is the first company that said they're expecting to meet 2023. They're in the certification process. I think it'll start out modestly. So maybe there's only starts out with one flight a day or something very modest. And as they build up experience and work out the hiccups for smooth and efficient flights, that it'll expand to both in Dallas, Fort Worth, their launch city, Los Angeles, Melbourne, Australia, or other places. And maybe in 10 or 20 years be a very big part of our lives.
But there are many technological and regulatory challenges to be overcome, and some experts say that public acceptance of this type of aircraft is the biggest hurdle to overcome.
We know that the eVTOL aircraft are inherently quieter than helicopters, so we believe that because they'll be much quieter, that they won't have as much pushback from citizens who don't like the noise of helicopters. The goal for eVTOL developers is to get the noise of the aircraft when it's landing and taking off to still blend into the background noise of the traffic in the city, so it's not considered to be a nuisance. However, just like drones and other things, of having multiple flights in and out of a vertiport all day, every day, there'll be some of that visual pollution where people don't want to see that stuff all the time. So it's really when you look at the benefits that it provides to the community. For instance, people are willing to put up with Uber and Lyft because they can get a ride that way. It's not something for the elite. So I want my Uber or Lyft. And because of that, we think that citizens will be more receptive to it.
Instead of being a noisy, unwelcome, sector of aviation, these quieter vehicles, and they're going to be smaller, are going to be able to do a lot for the benefit of cities. One is by putting a damper on increasing congestion. And if that's an important aspect of this whole concept, if you look at New York City, which has a $1.4 trillion economy, 1.4 trillion, the city believes that congestion today is a $100 billion drag on that economy. So from the standpoint of trying to reduce congestion that continues to grow every year, or even to stabilize congestion, that is going to have a big economic impact. So there are both societal and economic reasons for this industry to go forward and hopefully succeed.
Some of the new eVTOL aircraft are designed to fly autonomously. But are people ready to ride in aircraft with no pilot on board?
Certainly with the scrutiny of the autonomous assistance program for the Boeing 737 MAX, there is greater scrutiny for autonomy. And we've also seen this with helicopter, greater autonomy in the cockpit, Bell with the 525 and fly-by-wire. So it's a new capability that we haven't had in the helicopter industry until more recently. So as people understand it with the capability and the limitations, those will be able to apply to urban air mobility operations as well. We really think that autonomy will really be a key benefit for eVTOL aircraft, not necessarily required for first launch, but it will be able to increase capacity once you don't need a pilot on board.
And urban air mobility's infrastructure needs pose significant challenges too, but also great opportunities.
Those investments for ground infrastructure, we estimated to be about $20 billion for the 75 cities that we've looked at. I will say that while that might also seem like a big figure, the private sector will probably fund that, not governments, because the return on that type of investment is pretty good. And what I mean by that is that for every dollar you would spend on ground infrastructure, you would be able to produce about $8 to $10 in operator revenues. So there's plenty of margin there to have user fees absorb the costs over time of these investments in infrastructure and make a reasonable return for private sources of capital.
Over 200 new programs are vying to provide lift for new air taxi and delivery services that promise to break gridlock on the ground and reduce aviation's environmental impact.
So what's driving urban air mobility is, simply put, population growth, and specifically population growth in urban centers. The world's largest cities are so congested that there's nowhere to go but up into the unused airspace above cities, space well below traditional aircraft such as airplanes and helicopters. For the past 160 years, cities have been using the space beneath them in the form of subway systems for transportation away from crowded city streets. But at this point, given the high cost of real estate and all the buildings already there, a mile of subway can cost as much as $1 billion in some cities. And it just doesn't make economic sense. And yet something has to be done about congestion because of its high costs, as my husband stated in the video, and it drags the local economy down, slows business, and makes our everyday lives miserable. Evitol aircraft are possible because of new scientific advances, lightweight composites, which don't require the fossil-fueled lift of a heavy aircraft, lithium-ion batteries, which are still somewhat limited in range, but are consistently increasing, noise reduction technology, which is important because these aircraft will be flying much lower than traditional aircraft, and sense and avoid technology, which is absolutely necessary to prevent the aircraft from colliding into one another or power lines, buildings, etc. And there will be many more urban air mobility aircraft flying through and over cities than there are airplanes. So you might ask yourself, why not just use helicopters? Because they're vertical lift, right? And helicopters will continue to play an important role, but we expect that many helicopter operators, whether for tourism, medical transportation, passenger transportation, or the military, to complement their existing fleets with eVTOL aircraft. Now, we don't have a price tag on a single eVTOL yet, as they are still in development and FAA certifications have not been hammered out, but we're hearing that the new aircraft will cost a fraction of the cost of a helicopter. They have far fewer components, we do know that, which means less expensive maintenance and overhaul, and they operate on batteries, which means less operational costs. And additionally, they are going to be far quieter, which means they can operate in populated areas where helicopters cannot due to their annoying womp womp noise. So many of the top UAM aircraft developers have received thousands of orders for aircraft and options for orders once they are certified from helicopter operators, FedEx, UPS, Amazon, United Airlines, Virgin, American Airlines, Japan Airlines, and many others. Now, it's sort of odd that people are ordering aircraft that in terms of certification don't actually exist yet, but these companies know that it's just around the corner. And this is a picture of a Beta Technologies Alia 250, which has a range of 250 nautical miles. And Beta is a startup located in Vermont. UPS has ordered up to 150 of them and is expecting the first 10 to enter service by 2024. And let's take a look at some of the other major UAM aircraft developers. Joby Aviation is based in Santa Cruz, California, and its S4 model carries a pilot and 4 passengers. It has a range of 150 miles and a speed of 200 miles an hour. Volocopter in Germany is developing the VoloCity aircraft, which carries a pilot and 1 passenger, has a range of 22 miles and travels at 68 miles per hour. Archer Aviation is located in Palo Alto, California, and its Evitol is designed for a pilot and 4 passengers, and its range and speed are undisclosed. A lot of the aircraft developers are keeping information about their aircraft tightly under wraps. It's being tested, they are finding and fixing problems, and they are afraid of competitors stealing their ideas. There's already one raging lawsuit about this exact same thing. Perhaps the most innovative design is an actual flying car. And here's a video from a company called XPeng in China of their flying car prototype. Haven't we all fantasized about doing that, stuck in mind-numbing gridlock, just pushing a button, go woo up in the air and over everything? So what will these new aircraft be used for? Let's look at drones first, as we're all familiar with them, at least with the small ones that hobbyists use to fly around within the visual line of sight, taking pictures and videos. Tests are currently being conducted around the world, sending defibrillators to people suffering heart attacks. And they usually arrive several minutes before an ambulance can get there, which is important because each minute that passes without treatment for a serious heart attack or stroke victim means the victim is 10% more likely to die. And in February of 2021, the Canadian province of Ontario began Operation Remote Immunity, a program to provide both doses of the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine to 31 isolated First Nations in Northern Ontario, transporting some 32,000 doses north. And drones will also be used to rush blood from one hospital to another if there are numerous victims of an accident that need blood in a particular area. Organs for transplant rapidly decay, and getting fresh organs to the transplant recipient as quickly as possible plays a large role in the success of the operation. Tests are currently underway shipping organs by drone, as we will see in this video.
For a peek into the future when drones may help save lives, look up. That box is specially made to transport human lungs, donated by one dying patient to help another in dire need, like Alain Adak, diagnosed with pulmonary fibrosis in 2019. By last month, he could barely breathe.
It was just close to unbearable, having no air.
At 63 years old, he's recovering from a successful double lung transplant after waiting months for an organ donor, then agreeing to take part in a world first.
To be part of the future is kind of really exciting, and it's an honor for me.
I couldn't believe that this was happening because I was so afraid to lose that.
In late September, in the middle of the night, came word of an organ donor. The lungs arriving still inflated with oxygen in that special box, cooled to the right temperature. The drone flying 1.5 kilometers from Toronto Western Hospital to the Toronto General Hospital. Surgeon-in-Chief Dr. 𝗘𝗹𝗲 was there on the roof for that unique delivery.
if you could fly a drone in the city, then you can fly a drone anywhere, right? And so that was what we set out to do here, to prove that concept.
He says instead of transporting organs by vehicle or on a plane, using an unpiloted drone can cut down on emissions and save lives by saving time. This feat took planning and permissions from regulators, not to mention dozens of test flights involving a Quebec firm and its US parent company.
The advent of drones flying organs routinely is something that is very likely to occur within the next 10 years.
𝗘𝗹𝗲 himself performed the lung transplant, giving Odak a new lease on life.
I pledge that I'll take care of these slugs very well.
He could be the first of many getting that gift from above. Thomas Dagg, CBC News, Toronto.
So drones will also be used for what is known as last mile package delivery. For instance, instead of a huge truck burning diesel and lumbering into neighborhoods and stopping at many individual houses, the truck might park, open its doors, set off all the drones for that neighborhood, one of which will arrive at your house. Or Amazon will build fulfillment centers in each neighborhood, maybe a building the size of a gas station from which drones will fly the mile or two to your house. And drones really make a lot of sense for a delivery to that remote farmhouse located in the back of beyond. So Amazon has submitted its plans to the FAA for approval, including this drawing. You know, in terms of reducing traffic congestion, it will be some time before the new Evitol aircraft can serve as buses, picking loads of people up on regular schedules. The current versions of the aircraft are just too small to really make a dent in congestion. However, strategic use of cargo carrying super drones could certainly do so. In addition to increasing the congestion on roads, trucks often block entire lanes as drivers, unable to find a legal place to park, make their deliveries. And many major thoroughfares that should be 4 lanes in rush hour traffic can be reduced to half that capacity as delivery parks truck on both the right and left lanes. And this is often the case in Washington, D.C. Throughout rush hour. So the trucking companies build the cost of tickets and fines into their prices. They don't care. Those truck drivers who don't block lanes often cruise around the block until they can find a legal space to park. A study in Transport Policy magazine in 2019 found that in downtown Seattle, 28% of the total driving time of trucks and other delivery vehicles was spent encircling the block. So traffic congestion can be reduced by strategically removing some trucks from the road. And testing is being conducted on drones that can carry up to 1,300 pounds of cargo. And here's an illustration of a heavy-duty super cargo drone shown next to a truck, so you can get an idea of its size. FedEx, Amazon, UPS, and the US military are all exploring the possibility of using such super drones. So now let's look at the Evitol use cases. We envision one of the first will be for Medevac. In cases where every second counts, Evitol aircraft could start up almost immediately, whereas helicopters often take 10 to 13 minutes to get airborne. Evitol aircraft may be used by hospitals that currently don't accept Medevac helicopters due to community noise concerns, and Evitol costing so much less than helicopters to purchase and operate could save each hospital millions of dollars a year. In Vancouver, tests are being conducted on transporting radioisotopes used in cancer treatments, which rapidly decay. They have a half-life of only 110 minutes. The trip takes currently 3 hours by car, a ferry, and a car. It takes 1 hour by a car, a helicopter, and a car, and 30 minutes in an Evitol that flies directly from the manufacturing site to the cancer treatment hospital. And this time savings means that more of the extremely expensive life-saving material will be available to patients. Now, I'm extremely excited about airport shuttles. Airports are already set up for aviation, as we all know, for passengers, runways, air traffic control. There won't be as many new regulations for an eVTOL to operate at an airport as compared to, say, something completely new, like off the top of a parking garage downtown. Airport shuttles will take passengers from the airport to locations downtown or other heavily populated areas and take people from those areas to the airport. I'm also very interested in something called regional air mobility. You know those cities that are too close for a flight, but a pain in the neck to drive? So in the DC area, the problems are getting to Philadelphia, Richmond, Charlottesville, Virginia Beach. There's just no easy way to get there. So I did a little research about similar cases for Boonton. To New Haven, it's 100 miles and a 2.5-hour drive if you're lucky. What if you could get there in 30 minutes? Hartford is 137 miles away from you, Philadelphia 91 miles. Regional air mobility opens up countless more aviation options for city pairs with these awkward distances. Corporate flight departments have expressed a great deal of interest in eVTOL aircraft. Strategic teams of the Fortune 1000 companies often use private aircraft to get where they need to go in a timely and secure manner. Yet on the way to the airport, they get stuck in the same traffic like the rest of us. We envision that many of the top corporations will use eVTOLs flying from the top of their office buildings or from corporate parking lots to arrive quickly and painlessly at the airport where their jets are kept. Or perhaps in a city like LA or New York, flying from one skyscraper to another across town to avoid traffic. The use case that is probably furthest away is on-demand air taxi, where you order an eVTOL ride on your phone, proceed to the nearest vertiport and hop on. But this will be a reality within the next several years. As a matter of fact, some large real estate companies are already buying up parking garages in key downtown locations to turn the top level into vertiports. Now, nobody wants to park on the top level of a parking garage if they can help it, right? The car gets rained on, snowed on, heated into an oven by the sun in the summer, and it takes forever to drive all the way back down to street level. So parking garage owners could generate a lot of new revenue from these mostly unused portions of their properties. And here is an artist's rendition of the top level of a parking garage turned into a vertiport. Mostly, though, we expect the first vertiports to be heliports already in existence that are upgraded with battery charging stations and other amenities. This one is in London. Globally, there are billions of dollars of heliport infrastructure already there. Cities such as Tokyo and Seoul, Korea, have several hundred heliports each on the tops of high-rise office buildings downtown that are never used. They were built according to code for safety requirements. And in the case of a fire or a medical emergency, a helicopter could use that heliport. But given that eVTOL aircraft will be quieter and quite possibly safer, we imagine that many heliports not currently used will become vertiports. And at some point in the future, we envision megaports, specially built structures for handling multiple eVTOLs at a time with shopping, restaurants, parking garages, and many other facilities. One issue that is far more complicated than building new aircraft themselves or the vertiports where they will take off from is urban air mobility traffic management, or UTM. Our skies are already so congested. Just think about how many times you've been in a plane that gets stuck circling around and around a city due to air traffic control backups. There are not nearly enough air traffic controllers as it is. And having survived the pandemic, millions and millions of people are taking to the skies again. So how can we safely add hundreds of flights a day for both drones and eVTOLs to any given city to the congestion that we already have? So urban air mobility will need its own air traffic management system working in conjunction with the current system. human controllers in a UTM facility may become airspace managers focused on supervising automated systems and aircraft oversight, safety, and security. At such a facility, a single controller could control many more aircraft movements than working in a traditional airport ATC tower. And considering that our air traffic control system operates along the same basic lines as it did in the 1950s with the advent of radar, it's probably time to rethink the system. The airspace will be divided up like the layers of a cake, as shown here, with drones flying up to, say, 500 feet, eVTOL aircraft, perhaps from 500 to 2,000, and traditional aircraft, say, 3,000 and above. Before any routes can be determined, each municipality or state needs to do a thorough mapping of current infrastructure. And this is a diagram of the thousands of data points NEXA advisors found for the Ohio Department of Transportation. So UAM aircraft will be routed over water, train lines, and heavily trafficked roads as much as possible to reduce noise complaints. So all of those data points need to be mapped. Bridges and power lines will be examined by drones for maintenance, so they need to get mapped. Heliports and airports will get mapped for reasons we've already discussed. Current transportation systems will get mapped to see if a vertiport should be stationed at the furthest subway system, a station, to take passengers out to more distant suburbs instead of building expensive new train lines. The power grid and substations have to be mapped, as vertiport battery chargers will need a lot of energy and must be located on or very near the lines, as extending them is horribly expensive. Firehouses, police stations, any place where emergency responders could make use of the new aircraft will get mapped. And zoning is quite important to determine where flights should not be implemented. Over schools, for instance, the community farmers market on Saturday, nuclear power plants, military bases, wildlife preserves, prisons, highly concentrated residential areas. So what about noise? If UAM aircraft are too noisy, this industry will not take off, pardon the pun. It's bad enough hearing a few aircraft way overhead as we do these days, but dozens of loud aircraft buzzing over us will simply not be tolerated. The aircraft are bound to make some noise, but the goal is for the noise to be low enough to melt into the ambient background noise, such as regular traffic. What obstacles are standing in the way of immediate implementation of urban air mobility? Well,
Yeah, well,
hello?
oh, I'm sorry.
Technological limitations, which are disappearing with each passing month, especially in the realm of batteries. In terms of investment, currently $10 billion with a B dollars has been invested in several aircraft developers such as Joby, Volocopter, and Archer to bring their aircraft to market. And both Joby and Archer have gone public and are listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Noise. Well, as we saw from the video, it's being addressed. Public perception. This has not been addressed yet, as most of the public are unaware of what is coming. And until the FAA develops certifications and cities go beyond the preliminary steps of mapping and economic impact studies to actually selecting vertiport sites and planning routes, there's nothing for the public to object to, but this will become an issue in the next year or two. At the moment, the real impediment is regulation. FAA certification and standards for aircraft, vertiports, and air traffic management. Right now, the technology has far outpaced the policy. And there's a reason why flying on a US airline is the safest form of transportation, why we have so very few fatal aviation accidents. And that's because of FAA requirements for every aspect of aviation. And while urban air mobility is building upon our existing tried and true aviation system, there are many new aspects to it, such as numerous aircraft flying low over a city. So it will probably take about 3 years before the first of these new aircraft are flying near you, most likely in the form of delivery and medical drones, Medevac aircraft, airport shuttle, and regional air mobility. But they are coming, and now you know. So it's question time, and I really do hope that I will get some questions from you.
All right, so I would love to know about the hey Eleanor, thank you so much. This was fabulous. I would love to know about the energy efficiency of these guys. Maybe I missed this one.
Well, the great advantage is that there are no greenhouse gases. It's not run. There are going to be a few that at first that are hybrid with batteries, and then a bit of gas. But most of them are going to be running on batteries, and then later on hydrogen. So they are going to be much more energy efficient than your traditional aircraft using fuel and emitting all of those, all of the greenhouse gases. As a matter of fact, as we move to, most countries are, with the Paris Climate Accord, and they want to be, carbon neutral by different aspects, 2030, 2040, different 2050, depending upon the industries. And so in terms of aviation, this is certainly a step forward. And there are new aircraft. They look like regular airplanes. They don't go as far. But there's a Swedish company called iHeart that can go up to like 200 miles. It's like getting on a regular plane, but it's run on batteries.
All right. Well, okay. So when are they going to become school buses?
That probably is where we're going. I don't know if it'll be in my lifetime. It might be 2030.
But they should.
They should indeed, because I hate driving behind a school bus, and you just can never get around it, can you? But if it's up in the air, more power to them. So we have a couple of questions in the chat, I see. Okay, so the carbon print. So
that was mine.
Right. So Sam says, chitty bang. George Jetson is here. Okay, how close can we expect an air taxi to get to our homes? Well, initially it's going to have to land on an FAA approved vertiport. So, you know, if you're in a really cool condo downtown, it may land on the top of your high-rise building. But if you're in the suburbs, you know, it may land next to the subway station, right? So it's probably not going to land in your backyard anytime soon. Then we have, what would a ride cost for a person? Okay, this is a good question. Okay, so my company has done a study on that, and so we have found out, you know, it depends on each city, and we have financial models for that. But for the first few years, they could be $250 for a round trip, $300, you know, expensive. But if you're a business person, you can write it off or whatever, you know, you would probably do that. And certainly if you're in the medical field and you're saving a life, you're transporting the lungs, you're transporting the blood or the patient, those prices are not going to really matter much. And they're going to be a lot cheaper than a helicopter, no matter how you look at it. But for, you know, average passengers, the price is really going to go way down to an affordable level, like, you know, taking an Uber across town. Maybe it could be $80 in rush hour. I don't know. Once autonomy kicks in, and autonomy is a really polite word for there's no pilot in the plane with you, which I know is a scary concept to most people. Like, you get in and whoop, you're in a box up in the air by yourself. But the fact is that most airplane accidents are caused by pilot error. So when you know, it's not really unpiloted so much as remotely piloted. There are people in a control center making sure that all of these flights are running fine. If something becomes off nominal, which is a polite way of saying, Jesus Christ, get me out of here. Somebody, you know, in that remote air traffic control center will get involved to help you. That's how we look at it right now. But when that happens, so you take away the weight, which gets into our next question, of the pilot and the space of the pilot. These things are pretty small, right? So there's more room for passengers and there's left weight. So that's when the prices are going to really go down. And that might be 10 years from now, 12, 15. Okay, so how do birds impact things? You know, birds always seem to impact things, whether it's my windshield or, you know, getting sucked into an airliner. And these aircraft will be smaller. So I think that, you know, they're not going to really be sucked in because there won't be engines. It'll be battery operated and rotors. I mean, if a flock of geese fly into these little rotors, I don't, shish kebab for dinner, I don't know really what's going to happen. I'm sure this is something that people are looking at carefully. Okay, some companies will be nonprofit. What will determine where they fly? Okay, so that's an excellent question, and that's what my company's study is all about. We've looked at 85 metropolitan centers around the world. 39 of them are in the US. We've mapped and forecast the entire states of Arkansas and Ohio, all the major cities, you know, as well as many of the foreign cities. And so we have an economic model that takes into account many factors. Each region, each city is kind of like, it has its own fingerprint or DNA, and that depends on the population, the congestion, the GDP. Are people wealthy enough to afford this? The healthcare systems, are there a lot of hospitals that are constantly transporting patients and blood and organs? How many airports are there? We're mostly familiar with just the main airports we travel out of, but there are, you know, for each major city, dozens of smaller rural airports that will also be using this technology. And when you take all of these, you know, dozens of layers of data into consideration, we've come up with a ratio of, you know, how much investment will yield how much profit for each margin. And, you know, at the beginning, it's not going to be much much profit, if any at all. But over time, there will be a great deal of profit. And currently our forecasts look out to 2045. Are there any other questions? Would there be a single person option? You mean in the autonomous vehicle where you're just sitting there by yourself? Yes, there will be. And that will be at some point in the 2030s. So you just hop on and woo, there you go, up in the air by yourself. One of the most interesting studies I've read, it came out about 2 years ago, and it was an international survey of people in different countries as to how they view urban air mobility. And, you know, do you think it's a cool thing? Should it come to your community? Would you fly up in one early on? And what the researchers found was that it was dependent not so much by nation, but by age group. So if you're, 15 to 35 or 40, you're like, yeah, I want to get on the first one. That sounds amazing. If you're 40 to 60, you're like, I think I'm going to wait a little and see if anything crashes. And if you're older than 60, most people say, oh, hell no, you're not getting me up on one of those things, especially not without a pilot. So I think by the time this technology, really comes to be in the next 10 or 15 years, these younger people are going to be totally ready for it. So this is a great question, Latha. What about developing countries? How can the technology help them? It's already helping several companies in Africa. There's I believe it's a Canadian firm that operates drones. And, if you've ever spent any time in Africa, I've spent a lot of time in West Africa. The roads are just horrible. I mean, the potholes are like swimming pools. And it's very difficult just to go like 50 miles. I mean, it could take you days. And so when clinics need vaccines, which they do often, I mean, even before COVID, the childhood mortality in Africa has shrunk to almost nothing just because of basic vaccines against measles and whooping cough. So these drones in, I think it's Rwanda, Ghana, and maybe one other country, they fill up a drone with vaccines, blood, medications, whatever, and they send it to a clinic a couple 100 miles away, and it gets there like, within a couple of hours, and you don't have the rutted roads and the safety concerns and the broken suspension systems. So in areas that are remote, they are also very helpful. We completed a study for the Walton Family Foundation over the summer. And at first I was a bit concerned because looking into Arkansas, it's an extremely rural state. You know that, Hattie Jane. It's timber, and their biggest product is chickens. And I thought, I've done all of these metropolitan areas in terms of my studies. What are we going to do for Arkansas? But because it's rural, there's also many use cases for urban air mobility. If, for instance, a person is having a heart attack on a farm in the middle of God knows where in Arkansas, by the time you send an ambulance out, they might be dead or too sick to even recover. But if you send a doctor in an Evitol aircraft, they have a much better chance of making it. And also in terms of delivery, why should a guy in an Amazon truck drive 2 hours into the middle of nowhere using all of that diesel when you could just send things via drone? So yes, I think Africa, and other developing nations will see a huge benefit from this. It's currently in the testing stages and will expand in the next couple of years. Oh, and as I mentioned, in Northern Ontario, there are Indigenous people who it's very hard to reach. And they used to be reached in the winter on ice roads. Trucks would take supplies out on ice. Well, with global warming, the trucks get stuck in the mush and sink. So they can't even use the ice roads anymore. And this technology, the transportation, is a fraction the cost of what a helicopter would be. Okay, current air travel is so painful. How to make this a really cool, hip option? Yes, I think it is going to be a cool, hip option. And I think that's why the younger generation is like really excited about it. Plus, it is going to be, fairly tight space, I think, at least to begin with. But I was in a demonstrator, so it was all you put on this helmet, and it was like I was really going up in one, and it was so amazing to fly right over office buildings and land on one. And I think this is going to be really cool and hip. Let's see, all the billionaires have been heading to space. How do we get them involved? I think they're already involved. I think each one of them is going to buy their own little fleet and fly around from one of their office buildings to the next. And they're already very interested in this. Like I said, many of them have their own private jets, and for good reason, for security. And yet they're stuck in the same traffic that we are, on the way to the private jet. So it's going to make it a lot more convenient for them. Okay, so what do we do about all the people who are out of a transportation job? Actually, this is mostly greenfield, which is like new. It's like new jobs. It's not really taking away from people so much as creating new. So there are the capital expenditures when you build an aircraft, like once, you build a vertiport once, and there are costs associated with that. But then there's OpEx, operating expenditures. So that's like the maintenance of it, the operation of it. And there's going to be in each city thousands. It might be, depending upon the size, it could be 2,000, it could be 8,000 directly involved in urban air mobility, new jobs. And for each one of those people, they go out and spend money, right? They buy a house and a car. And so we've done all of these economic studies to show it's a kind of shockwave effect that for every new job created by urban air mobility, how many, for one of those dollars that you give that pilot or that engineer or the vertiport station manager, how does it ripple through the economy and create other jobs and taxes? And so far, our projections have been very positive for each locale we've studied. Okay, will these provide better in-flight cocktails? A joke? I don't know that that's a joke. I think that's a very valid question. It might be a kind of thing where you bring your own and nobody cares, as long as they tell you to wear a mask and you don't yank it off. I guess you'll be fine. There'll be less yahoos on the flight with you. There might be like 2 or 3 people.
All right, I think we're descending into the sort of the levity part of it,
which is always a good part to be, Lotte.
Well, and we are levitating anyway. Pardon the pun. So, hey, I love hearing you talk, Eleanor. You are so articulate and so wonderful, and I'm so glad that we're recording this, because I think this needs to get out there and spread it, because this is fun.
And it's coming, to a neighborhood near you.
Coming to your neighborhood.
Yeah, and people do need to be prepared for it.
So thank you, everybody. I'm sorry that not more people came, but I am thrilled that we did this. And this is what you and I talked 2 years ago or whenever, and I said I wanted to hear this talk.
Well, thank you so much for your program, and hopefully I'll see you next year for my new book,
Yes,
Off With Her Head,
in person and having some fun.
Yeah, 3,000 years of demonizing women in power. It's a history of misogyny. So we'll have another fun talk then.
Okay. Okay, we'll all be wearing pink things with things on top.
Exactly.
All right, good night, everybody. Thank you so much.
Good night, thank you.
Eleanor. Love you dearly.
Thank you,
See
Lana.
soon.
Love you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.